And welcome back to the Siri Poetry Library. We're continuing our series on the Goonies with part 4. I actually made a little mistake. It's not the one about Chunk. This is the one about Brandon and Andy, which was the hardest one to write. We'll go into that at the end. It's called Andy and I. Restaurant reopened. Strange to be back after so long. Seems yesterday we were kids stumbling in the dark, about to embark on our greatest Goody adventure. The brothers Fratelli come to meet us, their debt to society paid. They thank Andy and I for helping them get back on their feet. Francis had a table ready close to the stage. It's opera night, and Jake, still wearing his apron and hairnet, is about to go on. A painting hangs behind him, a glorious reproduction of Mama Fratelli as the Mona Lisa. As Jake performs selections from Madame Butterfly, my mind travels back in time. Pedal fast as light, be strong, determined, never say die. I'd say that to the boys a lot. Must have stuck, 'cause one cloudy Saturday they chased after a ghost ship. I was left tied to a chair watching MTV. I pedaled soon after on a bike stolen from a little Chinese girl. I'd make it up to her as soon as I dealt with Mikey. Mikey, that little shit! He's going to ride the kiddie bike home when I caught him. When Troy and Andy drove up, I never thought that in a few short hours she and I would begin a journey that would last far beyond high school. How did you know where to find the boys? She asked. How did you know to come here? I copied the map when I was younger than Mikey. I knew what they were up to because I once searched for the same thing. I never broke in myself. I had a kid brother to look out for. Andy and I stayed till closing. Flirted with the idea of checking out the basement, but we had other plans. Hadn't gone in years, but as night became early morning, we found ourselves standing on the deck of the HMS Inferno in the Copperpot wing of the Maritime Museum. A vessel once fueled by pillage and murder made us rich, saved the neighborhood, but most importantly, it was the place Andy and I fell in love. Want to walk the plank? She says with a smirk I hadn't seen in ages. We kissed and kissed again a few moments, feeling younger at each contact. The real adventure was not the ghost ship, not running from gangsters in dark tunnels, not even the bliss of youth and first love. It was the life Andy and I built together. That is truly a love that will never say die. A good life. Good enough. December 7th, 2014. But really today, because I was never, ever happy with that poem. I wasn't happy when I wrote it. I wasn't happy when I read it at open mic in 2014 and 15, because I think once I did do the whole series at the Revolutionary Lounge, where I used to read. This was a poem that I was just rewriting up until about a few hours ago, because there was so much that I had to fix. And even as I was reading it, I was still realizing certain mistakes that I might have to fix later on. Don't get too attached, guys. But yeah, Brandon and Andy were very hard characters to read. And they were very hard characters to write. Because, you know, he had the role of the older brother and he was in charge and he had a certain level of authority. So it was hard to get close emotionally to Brandon. And Andy, we see really little of that, too. So it was hard to get a handle on where she was. Because, you know, about halfway through the film, she's ready to leave with Troy. Not that she's going to get back together with Troy, but she wanted to get out of that well. And she almost did. So she's a very tricky character to read, too, because you're not exactly sure where... I mean, you are when she decides, spoilers, to not go with Troy. But you still are trying to figure out her character. It's really tricky. But it was tricky to figure out Brandon, so the characters that I can't get too closely emotionally make it very hard to write about them. I went through this when I wrote the Exo Squad series with the character of J.T. Marsh, who's a very hard character to read because he's just, you know, a soldier and he's in command, and it's very hard emotionally to get close to him, except for certain key episodes. And also, speaking of Exo Squad, that was originally first person, like these poems are first person perspective. But I decided that those were better as story poems. So it would be like he, she, or they, rather than I and me and stuff like that. I think that works a little bit better for that particular series. But with this series, this was always first person, and I never wanted it to change from that because I feel that it works much better. You can connect a little bit closer to this if it's read that way. It's intended to be read by the cast of the movie. I mean, one of my dreams is that, one day Corey Feldman reads his poem, and one day Sean Astin reads his poem, which will be coming soon. I just think that would be pretty cool. So that's part of the reason why I still kind of kept it that way, just in case if anything ever happens, they might want to check these out, maybe read them somewhere someday. But that's part of the reason I did that, mostly because even if it never comes to that, I like the idea of connecting emotionally to these characters, and I think first person lets you do that in a way that's very unique. At least in my opinion. I mean, I could be totally wrong, because I never said I was an expert at this. I just said I like poems and I like writing them and reading them. And once again, it costs nothing to do this. You just sit at a computer or you sit at a little notebook and you write it and you make it happen. And the greatest thing about poetry is that there are rules, but there are no rules. Like there are certain ideas of certain things you want to get across in a poem, but you could do it however you want. It's not like making a movie where you have to worry about budgets or a book that you have to publish. You can do whatever you want. And I like that. That's why I have issues when people try to be elitists, because elitism in art is the worst thing. I went through that when I was at film school, and I had to deal with professors that were mostly, for the most part, elitists. And I hated that. They'd always make me feel bad because I liked Star Wars, and I wanted to make movies because of Lucas and Spielberg and those guys mostly. And I experienced the same thing a lot of times in open mics, where certain poets thought they were above it all, or certain artists or certain musicians thought they were above it all, and that my poetry was often criticized, never to my face because, they're hipsters. But like a lot of my poetry was being criticized as being frivolous or about movies or TV or stupid things. One person, put me down because I wrote poems about Star Wars. So I had nothing valid to say in any other way because I was known as the guy that wrote poems about frivolous things and movies and TV shows and pop cultures. But see, with all my writings, I always believe that I balance out the concept of love. Nostalgia is a big theme in my work. Love is a big theme in my work. And also finding significance in the insignificance. The things that people say, this is insignificant, this is stupid. No, there's something beautiful there. Think of Andy Warhol painted a can of soup. And I get it. I'm like, that's brilliant. People at the time, not everybody felt that way. They thought, this is stupid, this is frivolous. But you can find the beauty and the greatness in the little things. And that's a big part of why I do any of the stuff that I've done, even the screenplays and the movies, is just using that and noticing the stuff that most people don't notice. And that to me is important. And I wish more poets were like that. I just feel like my experience was most of the poets I met were kind of pretentious and kind of just irritated me. Honestly, I'm sorry to say, I feel bad about that, but it's just how it is. All right, so we're going to move on to the one about Chunk next, I promise. We did not forget about Chunk.